And say welcome everyone to our weekly call. I hope you all had an excellent weekend and made the most of it. It always seems surprising to me that it's the end of July already. We seem to be sort of shooting through the year, but I guess that's a good thing in some ways. Right, let me share my screen just to remind you the purpose of our call this week, which, as I hope you can see, the intent is actually, if I change to the agenda slide, which I've forgotten to change. Right, so it's the IETF review rather than preview. Apologies. That we're going to do today. So I'm going to share a few thoughts that I have from the meeting last week. I can see a number of other people on the call that were also present in the meeting, either in person or indeed remotely. So in the interests of not boring everyone, please jump in many times as we go through this to add your observations rather than just getting mine from the meeting, which I think will be far more valuable if we do it that way. So let's kick off. And what I'm going to do, just to keep things simple, is I'll use the same slides that we used on the call a couple of weeks back, for any of you with good memories, where I just called out some of the sessions which at the time looked interesting. This is purely for consistency. And I'll just use these to walk through stuff. We don't have to, we would limit ourselves to this. So again, for anyone else that was there took part for any of the meeting, please do jump in to either talk to any of these topics or indeed any other ones that you joined through the week as well, to give us as full a reflection as possible. Okay, so I'll kick off. Let's see. So just some scene setting. So the meeting itself, for those of us that were there in person, took place in the Hilton Hotel at Union Square in San Francisco. I say Union Square, it's a couple of blocks off Union Square, but close enough, I guess. Sort of started on Saturday with the hackathon. I didn't take part in the hackathon, but I have to say, by observation, certainly all days Saturday and Sunday, there were a lot of people in the room. So that seemed to be particularly well attended from what I could see. The welcome reception Sunday afternoon was also very well attended, as was the hot RFC lightning talks, which always tend to take place 6 p.m. on a Saturday. And I gave a short update, because you literally get 4 minutes maximum on any given topic. So I took 4 minutes just to talk about our encrypted client hello deployment issues draft, and just signpost that to people to encourage others that may have an interest in the subject matter to take a look at the draft and potentially contribute to it. Then we got into the meeting proper on Monday, kicking off as I think is traditional, with the dispatch meeting, plus a bunch of others, including DNS Ops. I didn't attend the dispatch meeting because of the clash with DNS Ops. I don't know if anyone else on the call did, and if so, if you have any observations from that you think would be useful to share. And if you do, just unmute and share them, just to make things simple. Or pop something in the chat if that's not easy.
I was at dispatch, but let me look at my notes. Sorry, I joined late.
That's okay, Dan, and welcome. just while you're doing that, I was at DNS Ops. The most impressive thing to me was the agenda featured a large number of topics, and the chairs managed to navigate us all the way through all of them, so they didn't leave any out. And I think we only overran by maybe 5 minutes, if I remember rightly, which I think was pretty impressive, just given the sheer volume of content. So if you've not been to DNS Ops previously, it's pretty impressive how much the chairs aim to include on the agenda. My screen is just temporarily blank. Right, it's unblanked, helpfully. Dan, do jump back in if you've found your notes and have got anything.
Yeah, the only thing that I think overlaps with some DNS stuff at Dispatch was SAD CDN, which is from Matt Jonas of Facebook, Meta, whatever. And he's looking at how to signal bandwidth availability, especially on a 5G network for media streaming. And the DNS overlap there, I think, is going to be realized in a couple of months, and that is how to discover that such a capability exists. I think we need to build that, as an industry, and discovery, DNS go hand in hand, and that might be how we do it. Who knows? But that's a very slight overlap. All the other stuff in Dispatch was, I think, not interesting to this audience.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Whereas, as I say, I went to the DNS Ops. I'm looking through the agenda to see if anything in particular jumped out, other than the fact that Ray Bellis, who's on this call sometimes, I don't know if he's on the call today, I don't think he is, nearly managed to present several different papers through some confusion on timings with the chairs. He wasn't anxious to present other people's papers, but that did provide some levity in a fairly busy agenda. I must admit, I can't remember anything especially notable, and I'm looking through the agenda that's not prompting anything. I don't know if anyone else was in that session and wants to highlight anything that caught their attention. And again, if you did, just do what Dan just did and feel free to unmute and just say so. No, not looking like it at the moment. Well, if anything occurs to anyone, please come back in there. As I said, there were a lot of papers which you can see from the agenda. Actually, what I will do as we go through some of these, just in case you don't have the details to hand, I'll put the links to some of the agendas directly in the chat, so you can click to them easily rather than having to find stuff. So I've just done for that one. The other thing on Monday morning, I think pretty much immediately after DNS Ops, in fact, yes, it was, we had Arno, Tadai, and I went along to the security area office hours to have a discussion with the security area ADs, as well as with Warren Kamari, one of the DNS Ops. He's sort of the Ops AD, and some of the co-chairs of the TLS and security ops working groups. Really a discussion as to whether the ECH deployment considerations draft best fitted in TLS or in the SecOps working groups. The conclusion, if I try and summarize it, I think Chris, I can see, is on the call, so he'll jump in if I miss anything significant out. The way we left it is that I think it was Chris actually, plus Eric Rescola, we're going to review the current ECH deployment considerations draft to determine whether of the current text would in fact be better placed within the main ECH specification document. And then once they'd completed that task, we would then determine whether there was sufficient additional text remaining to warrant a standalone deployment considerations document as we have currently. So we'll see that work through over the next probably few weeks, but I personally thought that was a very positive outcome. If we can signpost some of the key deployment considerations within the ECH draft itself, that should be particularly helpful to people looking to implement support for ECH. I'll just pause there. If I've not explained that well, or if anyone's got any questions, feel free to unmute and just ask if there's anything unclear on that, or pop something in the chat if that's easier. I'm not seeing anything just now, so I shall continue. So moving ahead, session 2 on Monday was the first of 2 more incident messaging interoperability or MIMI working group sessions. I wasn't able to attend that, but I did attend the one that's coming up on it was Tuesday or Wednesday, so I'll make a comment on that then. Sort of part 2 of the MIMI discussion, which I thought was especially interesting. Again, as I go through these, if anyone else has got anything else to add either on that or anything else, please interrupt me and do so. I didn't go to the MADINAS MAC address device identification for network and application services session. I did catch part of the applied networking research workshop, the second one, which included papers on DNS as well as BGP. So that's session 3 on Monday. And if you bear with me, I'm just trying to call up my notes to remind me of that discussion. And ironically, my notes seem to have frozen. No, they've come back again. Network's going very slowly today. Where are we? Yeah, I didn't get a lot of notes, to be honest, on that session, so probably not a lot I can give you off the top of my head. But yeah, it was one of the so that was part of the applied networking research workshop. So sort of slightly more theoretical, but nevertheless, I think it was quite an interesting set of presentations that were incorporated, but difficult to summarize in a few seconds. Final thing from me from Monday was I went along to the Public Interest Technology Group side meeting, which was quite interesting just to hear sort of the thoughts of people with a particular interest, so mainly in privacy orientated topics. So we were just reviewing some of the agenda content for the rest of the week and determining where it will be sort of that their time might be best placed in attending. So nothing especially noteworthy, just coordination of activities through the rest of the week. Going on to Tuesday, the key transparency BOF was cancelled, which is why there was no agenda. So unsurprisingly, I didn't go to that. I did attend just looking at these parts of the decentralized internet, excuse me, infrastructure research group. In particular, I thought the presentation, just looking at some of the insights that were teased out. Yeah, sorry, on some of the sort of digital infrastructure policy were especially interesting. Not directly relevant to DNS, admittedly, but nevertheless quite insightful in their own way. So worth a look if you have a quiet moment to look at the papers. I missed the start of the meeting, so I'm told though that the presentation about bringing back the good fire of the old internet from Cory Doctorow was also a very good presentation. So that's maybe something to dip in if you have the time at some point. Just in session 3, the sort of general dispatch, one of the more interesting sessions overall was a discussion about how to make less work for area directors. And I think it's fair to say there wasn't really consensus in the room from a lively discussion between dissenting parties as to what area directors should or shouldn't prioritise, and whether it was indeed sort of practicable to reduce their workload. I think that discussion will continue. In fact, has continued sort of already post the meeting on the relevant mailing list. So I think that's got some way to run. I think everyone accepts it might be a good thing to do, but how to do it is to be determined. Was my takeout from that discussion. Then we went into the adaptive DNS discovery ADD meeting, which again had a number of presentations. I'm just trying to call up more details on my other screen. We seemed to get through, as I recall, the business of the meeting actually rather quickly, and finished a little early. No doubt thanks to good chairing. If Taylor or Glenn are on, I don't think they are at the moment, but yeah, I think there was some discussion, as I recall, around the sort of split horizon paper and a presentation on delegated credentials to host encrypted DNS forwarders on CPE, which is a bit of a mouthful of a title, but nevertheless, I think an important thing. Seemed to be making progress overall. I don't think there was a huge amount of pushback, as I recall, in the room, although some of you on this call were there also. Feel free to jump in if you think that's not quite how you saw it. But
yeah, so that was my presentation, and that seemed to go pretty well. The issue we were bringing to the meeting was getting CAs to sign certificates for every one of the CPE that are deployed by a large operator is kind of a pain for a pile of reasons. And TLS sub-certificates seem to be a better alternative to take that load off the CPE and bring the load effectively to the operator of the CPE, whoever is running that network, D-Link, Asus, Comcast, AT&T, whoever it is, rather than a CPE, rather than a certificate authority that they don't operate, and putting the load onto those. And it's especially, it's obvious during manufacturing, but then if we have certificates that expire in a year or a day or a week or whatever, then it's a continuous load basically on those CAs, and not really enjoyable for them, let's say. And one deployment ran into exactly that problem, so they started looking around at how to avoid that. So that's what this draft was about. The issue that was brought up at the mic was, wow, neat idea. Should have brought this up a couple years ago so that we could ensure that subcert support was added to the TLS clients. But then it was figured out we can use the service binding records to indicate that this feature is mandatory on the client. So of course it doesn't help with deployment, but it does help with advertising an ADD capable local resolver as needing this subcert capability to work on that network. So it's part of the requirements for the client. So that was kind of a nice solution for that. And then the other question that was brought up was if this could work for IP addresses for DDR. And we haven't, as far as I know, none of the authors have taken a look at that yet.
No, and I think also, Dan, I think just on the back of the overall sort of presentations through the ADD session, there was also a question: has anyone yet deployed DNR as opposed to DDR?
Right.
Not sure. You may even be you that answered that. Actually, I can't remember where that
Yeah,
part.
and I chatted with Ben in the hall, I think on Monday, and we're thinking of just pausing forward progress on the internet draft until we get some deployment experience. I think right now it's in working group last call and just letting it sit there and holding off on IETF last call until we get that deployment experience.
Yeah, because I think
But
there is now.
right now, that's the author's think right now.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned in the room, I think there is some DNR support in software. I hesitate to say deployment.
Yeah, there is open exchange for sure.
Yeah, and I think also, I've forgotten who it is now. One of the other software vendors. I will update my notes to post call to indicate who it is because my mind's temporarily gone blank. Yeah, was it ICS? I think, but I wouldn't swear to that. But there's some early support. But overall, my sense was in the ADD discussion, although there's a reasonable amount of ground covered, it was generally pretty uncontentious. I felt all very positive, which is a good thing. So generally, everyone seems supportive. Again, I'll just pause in case anyone else wants to jump in with anything else on that session before we move on. Give you a chance to do so. No. If not, after that, we had an excellent social in the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Good place to go to look around if you've never been there and find yourself in San Francisco. I think the consensus after that was everyone that went seemed to very much enjoy the experience. Then on Wednesday, we had the second installment of the MIMI, the More Instant Messaging Interoperability working group, which sort of touched on sort of interoperability between sort of different clients into the same sort of to interconnected clients, and how to sort of preserve the messaging and privacy and so on. There are a couple of sort of stages to the proposals there. The first stage seemed to preserve metadata whilst sort of preserving sort of encryption of messaging. The second stage seemed to propose a removal of the metadata, and I think there were some discussions within the room as to whether that was a good or a bad idea. But yeah, certainly sort of thoughts on how to move forward were certainly sort of shared in the working group. Again, I'll pause in case anyone, I know there's a few people that were present in there, if anyone wants to jump in to give additional comments on that. Because this is very much an important topic, very much consistent with the thinking within, for example, the European union about the need for interoperability to provide sort of more choices on clients in this space. No one's jumped in, so yeah. Well, as I say, my take out, it was definitely making progress. Then moving on to session two, two things you'll see I've highlighted there. The sort of Transport Layer Security TLS working group included a session just giving an update on ECH deployment. A couple of things for me from that. One was the just confirmation of sort of support within Chrome for TLS, sorry, for ECH in the sort of Canary version, so the sort of developer version, if you wish. So that's already happening, as you may well have seen from the weekly headlines this week, if you've had a chance to pick up on those. And the second thing, if I just glance at my notes for a moment, bear with me whilst I find the. Here we are. No, that wasn't it. Sorry. I've forgotten what it was. I'll add that to the notes afterwards if I recall. Overall, though, from that update, it felt like progress was being made on the sort of finalising the ECH spec. So speculatively, sort of year end feels likely for completion, probably, possibly, with sort of pre-standard support, being added in a number of places now. So it does seem to be gaining some momentum. And then whilst that was happening, the Human Rights Protocol Considerations Research Group, so part of the IETF, was also taking place. I caught the sort of latter part of that, and in particular, a presentation on sort of reflections of 10 years since the Snowden revelations. So there's an internet document has been issued, published by the independent submissions editor within the IETF, just to give a sort of take on sort of reflecting on the decades since the Snowden revelations. It was an interesting presentation in the research group, and some discussion, partly in response to a question that I asked, as to whether the community maybe overweighted its response to the Snowden revelations at a cost of not paying so much attention to sort of revelations around activities loosely categorized as surveillance capitalism, so focused on what bad things governments may be doing as opposed to bad things that companies may be doing, to greatly simplify that. But no, I think overall it was a pretty reasonable presentation that you may find interesting to take a look at if your diary permits. I didn't have anything I particularly sort of identified in session 3 on Wednesday, and then session 4 was the plenary, where quite a sort of lengthy discussions on various topics, particularly with the IASG on things like diversity of the community, workload, etc. Which will be, if those sorts of things are interested, take a look at the recordings, which are already available for all of the sessions. As you would expect, because the IETF sort of team are extremely efficient at that. And I'll sort of continue on unless anyone's got anything to add. If you do, just unmute and jump in, or put something in the in the chat if that's easier. But otherwise, Thursday, the first session of the day was detecting unwanted location trackers, or DOLT, BOF, which was intended to be a working group forming BOF. It was an interesting debate, but basically highlighting how trackers, and by trackers we're talking about air tags and some tiles, those sorts of devices, how they were being abused by some to sort of track people against their knowledge, and in many cases against their wishes. The main example being abused partners to sort of track their whereabouts, including at the point where they maybe were trying to leave for a refuge or whatever, which is clearly very problematic. The discussion was very interesting, just sort of teased out the fact of sort of the conflicting requirements between that versus when your luggage is stolen, or if your essentially elderly relative, you're using, say, an AirTag to just keep an eye on them should they become lost, so you're easily able to locate them, etc. So there were sort of mutually exclusive needs there. I don't think the working group reached an overall conclusion. So I think the BOF rather reached a reasonable conclusion. So I think further work is definitely required in order to determine if there is a viable working group charter there, and what a way forward is. In the meantime, I know Google and Apple, amongst others, are working together on a few things to address this problem anyway. But I think the question is whether there's anything useful to be done within the standards community. And it wasn't entirely clear to me from the discussion whether that was indeed the case yet. I didn't really have anything else significant from Thursday. Again, I'll pause in case anybody else did. If you think I've overlooked anything obvious, please unmute and say so. I should mention the reason why it's crossed out. We had tentatively expected to have a slot at the OPSEC working group to talk about the ECH deployment considerations draft, but given the discussion we had early in the week, we didn't pursue that, as it was obviously sensible to wait until the text had been reviewed to see if anything could usefully be inserted into the main ECH specification document. Okay, I'll move on to Friday, which we kicked off the morning with a side meeting on education and outreach, where amongst other things we discussed, for example, diversity of the community, outreach to policymakers, and better signposting of information, for example, when someone's asked to act as a document shepherd, etc. So there are some various other topics as well in the roughly 45 minutes we had of discussion before we had to sort of move on to other calls in our respective diaries. But yeah, that was good to be involved in that. Perhaps more usefully, in session one on Friday, we had an unfortunate diary conflict between the two different research groups, the Privacy Enhancement and Assessments Research Group and the Measurement Analysis for Protocols Research Group, both of which had privacy related topics on their respective agendas, which was unfortunate. I went along to the MapG session. I think an observation I had on the web privacy by design, evaluating cross-layer interactions of quick DNS and HTTP3, which I was there for that. I thought that was quite superficial as a research paper, and not not very good, if I'm honest. I don't know. Again, just prompt if anyone else was there at a more positive evaluation, but as I say, to me, it seemed pretty superficial. I'm not seeing anyone unmute who might have anything else to say. So I just for completion, and finally, last session I went to on Friday was the Oblivious HTTP application intermediation OHI working group, and yeah, there was a lengthy discussion. So Tommy Pauly gave a presentation which was very, very interesting. So Tommy Pauly, one of the key people from the Apple team, who I think a number of people on this call will certainly know, and he was trying to make a case for a different approach within OHI, but he was handicapped by not wishing to disclose too much in too much detail about the use case or use cases that he had in mind. And if I'm honest, it was pretty well, I thought it was unconvincing. It may well have been very convincing had he been able to disclose the use case that he envisaged. He presented something called streaming Oblivious HTTP, but couldn't elucidate in detail what his target use case or use cases were, and it was quite tough to really get to grips with it. And yeah, I think Michael's put it in the chat. There may be some sort of sign-off issues within Apple on that, which is perfectly understandable. But because of that, he didn't feel like he was getting enormous support within the room, which clearly may change once he's able to be clearer on what the use cases were. But I think there was a fair amount of pushback from Eric Riscola, amongst others, who was highlighting that a lot of the functionality he was wanting was available already in TLS, but it didn't have the shortcomings that appeared to be inflicted by implementation in the way that Tommy was suggesting. Which, as I say, may make perfect sense once he's able to disclose the use case, but he couldn't. So, as I say, my sense was the people in the room at least seemed unconvinced as a collective from that. There were some other interesting presentations as well, but that one particularly caught my eye in there. Right, I'll stop there for a moment and just see again. Does anyone else that was present for all or part of the IETF meeting have anything you think I particularly overlooked that would be useful just to highlight? I'm not seeing anyone unmuting, so I assume not. Plenty of good stuff through the week. Overall will be my summation, and all of the materials I think will all be up now for your perusal if you weren't there or you missed anything important. Okay, whilst we were doing that, there was a load of things happening out in the world. I covered sort of news headlines for the last couple of weeks, so I didn't have time to do one last Monday. So a bumper edition this week. I think I've already mentioned support for experimental support, I should say, for ECH within the Chrome Canary. Has been announced in the last few days, and then in the main Chrome release, a number of fixes and upgrades, including some DNS related ones. I've sort of highlighted a couple of those on the slide. So 1% of Chrome users that use Quad 9 will have DOE enabled automatically as part of a test, as will users of Cox, one of the US ISPs, will have DOE automatically enabled. I'm not sure with Cox if that's all of their users or 1%. The text I saw was slightly unclear. But yeah, just interesting to see that coming out. Plus, there's some stuff still on the Ethereum name service, a topic we'll probably come back to on this call. I think it warrants further attention. I've put a link to an article there. You'll see, in my view, I think it's a somewhat rose-tinted view of ENS. But interesting to take a look at if you have the time, just to see how it's being positioned as the replacement for the obsolete DNS, at least by some people. There's a bunch of other stuff, such as an article from VeriSign on preparing support for post-quantum algorithms within DNSSEC and so on. I'm obviously not going to cover all of these. You can read them at your leisure. Very interesting further article by Infoblocks on Decoy Dog. Some DNS malware, so that's certainly worth a look. And there's a related article, but it didn't have exactly the same content. So if topics of interest generally, you might want to take a look at the Bleeping Computer article as well, which had some additional material in it. Just seeing if there's anything else worth highlighting. I should highlight towards the bottom of the page, Dan Sexton, the CTO of the Internet Watch Foundation. There's a blog post, or there's a post on the Ripe Labs blog, if I can speak properly. Dan wrote up his experiences at the last IETF meeting in Yokohama, which just worked its way through the editorial process, just to give his take as a newcomer to the community in terms of how we found it. Dan was also present in San Francisco, but as I say, this write-up is from his experiences in his first meeting several months back in Yokohama. Plenty of other things in the news as well, not least of which let's see, stuff on Twitter, or X as it's now called. Plenty of other things besides that, so I'll leave you to sort of take a look at all or any of those at your leisure. In the meantime, a reminder, a number of calls for paper and workshop proposals. Middle of this month is a deadline if you want to present a paper at the ICANN DNS Symposium in early September. So you've got a couple of weeks yet to put your proposals in via email to the address there. And then at the end of the month, that's a deadline for proposals for NENOG 89 presentations. Also the end of the month for the DNS Research Federation for basically proposals for funded project work, I think, is, if I can try and summarize that. So if that's your thing, that might be worth a look as well. And then a bit later on into middle of September for RIPE 87 proposals, and end of September for UK NOF. So a few things there if you want to present at forthcoming conferences mainly. And then we've got events running. I've added a few in the start of next year now. Probably the main ones like to be of interest to this group would a reminder, we've got the 3 events at the start of September in Vietnam under the auspices of the of ICANN. That's the Day of DNS Abuse discussions, followed by the DNS Symposium, and then co-located at the same venue, and you register under the same mechanism. OARC 41 is also being held. So 4 days of DNS related stuff back to back. One of the other things I've added at the end of September is the European Commission's high-level group on internet governance is taking place. Too early for the agenda for that, but that will be forthcoming probably in a couple of weeks or so. Okay, just wrapping up from me. Next week we'll touch on DNS resolver information. So I think both of the co-authors will be joining the call to do that. So that's Tiru and Med for those of you that know them. And you can see other things we've got scheduled coming up over the next few weeks through to potentially the middle of September. And I think that's everything from me. So let me pause there. Apologies for talking for so long. Let me get rid of my slides. That's better. And just see if anyone's got anything else that you want to mention on the call this week. So if you do, put it in the chat or just unmute and speak out loud, whichever is easier for you. And that's whether there's anything you think I've missed on reflection from the IETF meeting, or indeed anything else unrelated to that you'd like to just raise while we're gathered on the call together. So just jump in if you wish to. Give you a few more seconds just in case you do.
Hi, I have a question about the DNS malware you mentioned. Does anybody have any experience about it?
Sorry, say again, Kurt. Any experience of what? Sorry.
The malware you mentioned and DNS malware.
Oh, what, the decoy dog? I'm not sure if anyone's on from InfoBlocks, but does anyone else? Has anyone come across that? Anyone got first-hand experience? Want to talk about it? Doesn't look like it. Kurt, it's a good question though. I can easily ask our friends at InfoBlocks if there's anything they could usefully share, if that will be of interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that for a couple of weeks' time, just to see if they could join us to do that. Yeah, good point. Okay. Anything else from anyone else? I'm not seeing any typing. Can't see anyone unmuted. In which case, as I say, with apologies for talking at you so long, hopefully that was useful. If you do think of anything else that's useful to share, you can obviously use the mailing list to do that. But other than that, hope that was helpful. Have a fantastic week, and we'll catch up same time next week. So look forward to speaking to everyone then. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Andrew.